And then we have this assignment. You have the opportunity to know how to draft all these components. We gave you a bill called the Widowhood Leave Bill. That bill seeks to give leave to widows, to spouses of widows, give them 28-day leave after their spouse has died. Now, the leave is, that bill is not well drafted because certain preliminary provisions like the application clause does not exist. Then, the mistake in that bill is it created a regulatory agency, which is a statutory corporation. However, the administrative provisions are not there. So your duty is to insert the administrative provisions that are not existing and the preliminary provisions. So it gives you an opportunity to see how you can draft a bill, a well-drafted bill. So that's why we have given you that bill as an assignment. We have also given you a copy of the Nigerian Communications Commission Act 2003. It's a well-drafted bill. If you look at the table of contents, preliminary provisions, principal provisions are there, miscellaneous, and then final provisions. So today we would have an interactive session. It's not going to be a lecture. You are going to we'll start from number 1. Oscar, please put up the parts of the principal provisions in the chat box. So we'll start calling each person to describe what is substantive provision. After that, we go to administrative provisions, one by one until we finish all parts of principal provisions. That's what we'll do today. Today is a discussion class. So I'll begin with Let's Sassy. Please tell us what are substantive provisions. How would you describe substantive provision? Yes, let's Sassy. Okay. I want us to go by the way the names are showing. Petty, Petty, Libby, you can answer. You raised your hand.
Thank you, Professor. By substantive provisions, we mean those provisions that defines rights and duties and obligations, responsibilities of the individuals or organizations that are going to be regulated by that act. That is where they are going to be included.
Thank you. That's correct. But there's something we said about the word substantive. What does it mean? What does it connote? Substantive. You remember, you can have a substantive matter and you can have an interlocutory matter. For those of you who are litigation lawyers, what's the difference between the substantive suit and the interlocutory suit? What's the difference?
I believe the substantive ones are the ones that go to the core, or in the context of legislation, the one that goes to the main point of that legislation, to the heart of the legislation, to the substance of the legislation.
Thank you. The words you have used are very appropriate. You remember, a legislation has 4 parts: preliminary, principal, miscellaneous, and then final. you can see when you have substantive, is different from miscellaneous. Miscellaneous is the extra, the supporting things. But the core, Libby used the word, the core, the subject matter, the main point. So in the part of the legislation, the substantive provisions are those substance. And we said in legislative drafting, ideally, every legislation should deal with only one subject matter. Now, take petroleum, for example. Petroleum has different subject matters. The taxation of petroleum is another subject matter. Therefore, a separate legislation should deal with taxation of petroleum. You cannot have a petroleum legislation that deals with every aspect of petroleum, such as petroleum taxation, petroleum host community funds. No, that is not how we should draft. That style of drafting is a civil law tradition where one legislation deals with every aspect. No, that's not how we draft. In common law jurisdiction, one legislation deals with one subject matter. And we gave the example of the Nigerian Petroleum Industry Governance Act 2022. It is so wide because an attempt was made to regulate every aspect of petroleum, bring them under one legislation. That's not how we draft in common law. In civil law, it is acceptable because one legislation, they call it a code. A code is an exhaustive treatment of any subject. So under the Petroleum Code of France, you have Chapter 1, Petroleum Taxation, Chapter 2, Host Community Trust Fund, Chapter 3, Petroleum Marketing, Downstream, Number 4, Chapter 4, Petroleum Upstream. But we don't behave that way in common law jurisdictions. This is an important convention in legislative drafting that you must bear in mind. So that's why in the parts of any legislation, you have substantive provision, then you have miscellaneous or supplementary provision. Miscellaneous is additional, addendum, not the main point. All right, so let's go to the next person. We are seeing Adediba Babatunde. Can you tell us another aspect of, we have dealt with the substantive provisions, which is, can you give us the example of a substantive provision as part of the principal provision? Hello, Adediba Babatunde, it's your turn. Today we are having a discussion class. We want you to identify parts of, under the principal provision, all the parts of the principal provision, and give us examples. So we have dealt with the substantive provision. Somebody has described what it is. Can you give us an example of a substantive provision? Because substantive provision is where you confer rights, privileges on anybody, the substance. So can you give us example? Any law, you can use any law, for example. Mr. Oscar, you are next on the line. Can you give us an example? Yes, a real life example from a law such as the Nigerian Communications Commissions Act 2023. Section 3 is the substantive provision. Can you read it out? Okay. Go online, check for any law, and read us the substantive provisions in that law. All right. The next person is Joyce Motseki. Yes, can you give us an example? A law, can you read the substantive part of any legislation you can?
Oh, Prof, may I look through any legislation I can find?
Yes, any legislation. Tell us what is the substantive part of that legislation. Read.
May I be given just a short time to go over it?
All right, so we'll come back to you. We have
Thank you.
Letsasi, you've raised your hand. Can you give us?
Thank you, Prof. I'm looking at our Labor Act 2024.
Okay.
And part 5 is titled Labor Institutions. And chapter 1.
So before part 5, can you read
yes.
section? Is there a section 3?
Yes,
What
there should be. Let me just browse to it. Section 3 in this act is the application. It delineates the application to whom.
Good. So that's part of preliminary. Section 4.
Yes.
What is section 4?
Section 4 is about interpretation. Is the interpretation section.
Okay, so that's also in your jurisdiction. That's preliminary. In our jurisdiction, interpretation and definition is part of final provisions. Yes. What's section 5?
Section 5 is titled "The Principles Used in the Interpretation and Administration of the Act."
Still part of
yeah.
preliminary. Section 6.
And Section 6 is part 3. It's under fundamental principles. So Section 6 begins with an unfair discrimination. It now
Okay, so you know what we said. That's like the purpose clause. Some common law jurisdictions are now using it, although we do not. So section 7, please.
In 7, I think Section 7 is still under part 3 because it deals with unfair labor practice, and then it explains what instances are unfair labor
practice. Fundamental principles. Skip.
Yes, it's still fundamental.
Section 8.
So Section 8 also is still under fundamental. It speaks 9 prohibition of forced labor. I think these sections, maybe I should go to the next part because these sections under part 3 deal with yes.
So go to the next. Let's see what's it.
The next part is the part that I had actually gone to earlier that deals with the labor institutions. It's
so read the first section there.
First section is section 11. Under this part, it reads establishment of the National Advisory Committee on Labor.
That's the substantive. Read it.
It says there is established a National Advisory Committee on Labor. That is section 11.
Good.
Then section 12 talks about composition of the committee.
Excellent. Excellent. So you can see section 11 alone is the substantive provision. Immediately you have established. The next thing is the administrative provision, the composition. So section 12 begins the administrative provision. The substantive provision is usually very short. It establishes. Can you read the entire section 11? Let's hear it again.
Section 11 is about the establishment. It's very short. The one that says there is established a National Advisory Committee on Labor. Then section 12 is the one that now deals with the composition of the committee.
What of section 13?
Section 13 is to the functions of the committee.
So those are the administrative provisions. Good. I'm happy. The more you identify these things, you're moving from a mechanic to an engineer. You now know the parts of any law. Even if somebody rearranges it, as you have in your jurisdiction, in your labor, uh, you can see, you already know that this is what this is. This is part of preliminary. Okay, so we'll move on to the next person. Joyce, are you ready with an example of substantive provision from a legislation?
I'm not ready yet, Prof. I'm not ready yet. I'm still trying to find some legislation around here.
Are you in the office or in the bedroom?
I'm out. I'm outside in the office.
Okay.
Yes, Prof.
Okay, so we'll move on to the person, Keno. Kenoye. Hello, madam. Advocate Kenoye.
Hello, sir.
Yes, so please share with us the substantive part of any legislation you can lay your hand on.
Unfortunately, sir, in the office. I am so sorry.
Okay, we'll move to the next person, Kingsley.
Hello, sir. Hello, can you hear me, sir?
You need to increase your volume.
Can you hear me, sir?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we can hear you now.
My network has been messy. I don't know what is happening, sir. But I just heard my name.
We said, can you share with us the substantive provision of any legislation you can lay your hand on?
Oh, so sorry. I don't have any where I am. Um, actually went to see somebody.
Okay, we move to the next person, Liti Boho. Okay, you're ready for us now. Oscar, go ahead for us. If you raised your hand. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Good. So that's the substantive provision. Little Boho, you raised your hand. You're ready now. Yes. Madam Kenoe, you raised your hand again.
Yes, sir. I am looking at Section 37 follows. The Children's Court satisfied that any child brought before 25 child in need of care and protection, it may or parent or and B, make an order placing the child in the custody of a fit and proper person for a period specified by the Children's Court. 1C, of Roman figure 1, the Department of Social Welfare, or Roman figure 2, some other person appointed for the Children's Court for a period specified by the Children's Court. And then it just keeps going.
The legislation determines the substantive provisions. So if a legislation did not create an agency, such as this, although the family court is created, we have the Cyber Crimes Agency of Nigeria. I mean, Cyber Crimes Prohibition Act. It never created any agency. The police is the one to implement that law. So the substance of the Cyber Crimes Prohibition Act is section 2, where it says all offenses committed by use of cyber is hereby prohibited. So you must know that not every legislation has administrative provisions. Administrative provisions only arise where a legislation creates a statutory corporation, an agency of government established by law. Okay, so let's keep going. Peter, you have answered. Rand Seol Netanyahu, please give us an example of a substantive provision in any law that does not create an agency.
Good afternoon, Prof.
Yes, good afternoon.
Or is the question to provide an example of a substantive provision in any law that does not create an organization?
Yes, that's what we're saying.
Could I have my turn a bit later? Just came into the office. Just let me find any law.
Okay, so next person.
Thank
Capello. Capillo. Capillo. Okay. Umaru Hana. Umaru Hana. You want to share with us? Okay, we start again. Let's start with, now we finish substantive, or we'll come back to Netanyahu. You will give us an example. Yes, Umaru Hana.
All right, good afternoon, sir. Sorry, my mic was a bit faulty, so I had to configure the settings. All right, sir. So my question, sir.
The question is, can you read the substantive provision in any legislation that does not create a government agency?
Okay.
Can you identify the section which is the substantive provision?
Okay, the legislation I have here with me is the NCC Act of 2003.
Okay.
I don't know if this.
Apart from that one, that one creates an agency. Look for another legislation.
Oh, okay, so I think I have to look for one because I'm not very. This is just a soft copy I have on my.
Yes. Let's see. You're ready. Go ahead.
Thank you, Prof. I have an example here of a legislation that doesn't have the administrative provision. It doesn't create any agency, and that would be our Interpretation Act 1977. So after, I think the substantive provisions would start from Section 4, where the substance begin by the legislation dealing with grammatical variations, gender and number. It goes to Section 5, where it deals with service by post, and then it
No,
proceeds.
read the substantive provision. Let's hear.
Grammatical variations, gender and number. That is Section 4. Subsection 1 says, where a word...
That cannot be the substantive provision. That cannot be. Remember, what is the subject matter of that legislation? Go and read the long title.
The long title... let me... The long title says to amend and consolidate the law relating to the
That's the problem. That's the problem. You are reading the amended version. Read the original law on Interpretation Act.
This is the act, Prof. I don't know why it starts like this, but...
To amend, it says to amend. So to amend means there was an Interpretation Act before 1997.
Perhaps let me check the repeals, then I would come back later.
Okay.
Oh, there is a 1942. I don't think we will find this one. It's too old. There is a 1942 Act.
So I think that's the one that contains the substance of Interpretation Act.
But I have a question. Yes. I have a question when we are at that, Prof. Maybe for my understanding. I realized that you were quick to point that the section that I was reading is not a substantive place. I just wanted to understand this act, or perhaps even the repealed act. My understanding is that it deals with the interpretation of. It will of course deal with the grammar or interpretation of holidays and the source, like how we interpret legislation, is how we understand the grammar as it used in legislations. So I just wanted to know what then would those mean in the context of a piece of legislation like this?
Go and look at the original act. There will be a section that says this act establishes the rules that apply and the context to words used in legislation in the Kingdom of Lesotho.
Okay, Prof.
That will be the substantive provision. Your clue is, look at the long title. What is the substance of that law? Then, after the preliminary provisions, immediately after preliminary provisions, the next thing should be the substantive provision, stating, conferring the rights on that legislation to carry out that subject matter. Yes, Lesanyahu, you raised your hand. Did you find a substantive provision?
Yes, Prof, I did. I have with me Lesotho Passports and Travel Documents Act of 1998. The long title says, an act to provide for the issuance.
Now provide the mechanism, that will be the miscellaneous provisions for licensing scheme, especially when you create the conditions on which you get passports. If you're denied passports, the procedure for all those are now the miscellaneous provisions. Do you see? So what Netanyahu has read is the substance of that law. The reason we take time to do this is to say the purpose of this formal training is to graduate you, to elevate you from the mechanic to automobile engineer. A mechanic only knows trial and error. He only knows copy and paste.